Hello, hello. Thank you. I was told there would be a slide hawking my book. I was promised I could. My publisher is here, and they're getting angry right now. Well, whatever. Oh, I gotta press a button? I have to do something? Hey! And I will get to some borderline offensive jokes about astronauts in a minute. But first, just a second, I wanted to be a little sincere and say thank you, because this is the post-apocalypse BAHFest. And we really thought maybe it was over, that this was our first show back since. We haven't done it anywhere else, and just to see a crowd of this size for our totally real science show is genuinely heartwarming. I like to tell some science anecdotes you might not have heard, just to get things going. And a big part of my book, A City on Mars, available at fine bookstores everywhere. Thank you. Yeah, another round. No. A big part of our book is about how astronauts are liars. We discovered that if you read, as we did, most of the astronaut memoirs, they will cop to lying a lot to medical staff. One guy defiled his own medical record. One of my favorite stories, Eileen Collins. Does anyone know Eileen Collins? Guys. First female shuttle pilot. Anyway, she had this great story that she did something all pilots do, which is she lies to medical and psychiatric staff. And she had this story. She came in, she's a hotshot test pilot, had beaten all the tests, and then she goes in for the psych evaluation. And she does a questionnaire, and then it's time for the interview, and she goes and sits down, and the psych guy looks at her and says, "So, there's a question." And the question is, it asks, do you see things that other people don't see? And she had written, yes. And he said, that question is designed to determine if you have hallucinations. And the funny part is, anyone else who was not a pilot or a NASA astronaut would have said, oh, there's been a misunderstanding, or that's a stupid question. What she actually said was, if I had hallucinations, I would lie to you about them. And so I'm doing this as a kind of uplifting speech for BAHFest. And so the absolute best story was from Apollo 7. It was a guy named Walter Cunningham who had flat feet, and he got through by walking on tiptoes during the medical exam. And then he was selected to go up. A few months out, his son was getting some bones checked, and he said to the doctor, could you check my shoulder, because it really hurts, but I don't want to talk to a NASA doctor about it. And so they scanned it, and they thought they found bone cancer. And he told no one. And then he was at a party a couple days before launch. He thinks he's having a heart attack. He literally thinks he's dying. There are 2 doctors at the barbecue he's attending, but they're from NASA. So he says nothing. And then there's a nurse who says she needs a ride home, and he volunteers to drive her home, because he literally says, if something goes wrong, I'll have a nurse on the ride home. Of course, he's driving the car. And he actually called this sort of fixer he knew, who got him a secret doctor on the sly to see if he was dying right now. And the guy said he couldn't rule out a heart attack, but he couldn't rule it in either. And so Walter Cunningham went aboard Apollo 7 thinking maybe he had bone cancer and was having heart attacks, and by the way, also had flat feet. And, at BAHFest, we don't tell lies like that. But I think there's a lesson about reaching for the stars. I don't know, I actually didn't think through my ending. But the point is, he lied a lot, and he still made it to the top. And so thank you. I feel BAHFest is back in the same way. Yeah, thank you very much.
But then I realized I didn't know if my mic was working. Am I amplified? Yes. I'm like, put it back on Zach's book. Who's changing back? Thank you. We keep that up. Yes, the geodesic dome is correct. I did check, and I would have refused to continue the show if it had been wrong. You can see at least 2 of the pentagonal joining points. If you're not enjoying this, you've come to the wrong show. So, my name is Matt Parker. I am your host for the duration of this show. So, that was way too easy around. Are they thinking, I bet he's not, but he's lying to get to the top? And they're genuine. this is it, right? So I appear, I'm very nice to you. I bring on a person to do a thing, they go away again, I reappear. I'm kind of here to do 2 things for you as an audience that you to care about. One is I let you know what's happening, I give you instructions, I let you know where we're up to. I try and keep this to time, although I don't know what it said on your booking information, but the details they sent me had start time 5 o'clock and then just no information about when it ends. And I said, when does this end? And they said, well, nominally 2 hours. But you know, there's no hard deadline other than, and I wish to quote word for word, the tube will stop running at some point. I, however, am staying a walking distance away, so I am not motivated. So we'll try and it'll be absolutely fine. So in theory, 2-ish hours. We will see how we go. You're going to see 6 fantastic speakers who will be competing to convince you of their fantastic, I don't know what the B stands for, but they've got an ad hoc hypothesis that they wish to share with you. And there will be, in a moment, there will be judges here who will be coming up to grill and judge and check the scientific accuracy and practicality of whatever hypothesis is being sent to you. However, I am the conduit by which you can also have an opinion and by which you can influence the results. I get to decide who the audience favorite is. And I'm going to do it the same way I've done previously, for I hosted the show a couple of times. We're going to be using a decibel meter on my phone with no additional accuracy or checking. And we're going to do a test round, if that's okay, because it might pop up and make me upgrade to the paid version. And I'd rather check that now than when it matters. So I'm going to say, I can't say what you're voting for once I've started the reading, or it will register me saying that. So this is going to be very awkward. I'm going to say what you're voting for. I will then push the start button. I will give you a thumbs up. In a perfect world, someone will come in late during that process. And then you cheer the appropriate amount. Okay, here we go. Or my phone will, okay, it's unlocked. Premium membership. Do we need unlimited data export? No. £44.99 a year? Who is measuring 45 pounds worth of loudness in a year and needs an app for it? Okay, here we go. Okay, so you'll be voting on the concept of pi. Doesn't have to go on forever. 104 decibels. Max, that was peak. Average was 93. Should we vote on averages or maximums? Wait, we'll do a vote. Hang on. Averages. Oh, wait, do we decide this with the average or the max? It's fine. I've memorized both. I can hold 2 numbers in my head at once. Okay, here we go. Okay, wait. Maximums. 106 decibels. Average has only got 93. So, okay, so it'll be the loudest. It'll be the loudest applause. If you think it's going to get any slicker or more professional as you go along, you are incorrect. And I don't want to rate the app. Every year I think, should I get my phone like up? No, it's not worth it. Okay, so that's how that's going to work. We'll have several speakers. They'll come up. They will present their theory. They'll be judged. At the end, we will do, so it's fair, we will do all the applause at the end. So you need to remember, lock away your emotional state after every presentation and then replay that later on. I know it's not great, but let's, the data integrity is our top priority around here. By way of very quick introduction of myself, my name is Matt Parker. I do maths things on the internet. I think that's the... If I haven't got the app running, the applause doesn't matter. I will be around, and there's like a book signing afterwards, and I'm here, so people watch. I've watched Numberphile when you were a kid. I am so old now. Or anything I do online, etc. I'll be around to say hi and chat and whatnot. But during this, they brought me in for my professionalism at running these things. And I hosted 2018. Was it the first year I did, Zach? I think I did 18 and 19. Then we had a break. And now I'm back. And actually, we kind of want to pick this up from the break, because if you've come to these previously, you will know that before we get to the contestants, scientists, we have a keynote speech from a professional, a titan of the field. And this time we'll be bringing in someone who has won previously BAHFest twice, on 2 separate occasions. They are a free speech lawyer from Boston. They got an A- in high school biology, but didn't we all? They believe it's easier to fake the science than to fake the comedy. That's very true. They gave a talk at BAHFest in October 2019 about how we were due a pandemic. It was... Yeah, very funny at the time. Substantially less so afterwards. Now, got us thinking, obviously BAHFest is like the pinnacle of scientific communication. Like, this is where great theories are announced. And we're like, well, obviously we're going to attract the greatest minds who will be capable of predicting something like that. And then we thought, well, hang on a second. What if it wasn't a prediction? What if it was causal? And so, in the interest of reproducible results, we have asked them to come back and give exactly the same talk, word for word. And we will, now, as you're watching it, bear in mind, this was written before we went through a pandemic, and we have not changed it to make it any less awful now. Word for word, we said, and then we'll see if half a year later, what happens. And so, to that end, can you please put your hands together for your, leave it up, for your keynote, no, you can go to their slides. For your keynote speaker, put your hands together for Michael Anderson.
Epidemiology is basically detective work. So tonight, I'd like to reopen the investigation of a cold case, the outbreak of the deadly bacillus Yersinia pestis in the pandemic of 1348, known to us now as the bubonic plague. Now, the mystery here is not why this happened. When we look at the Middle Ages, the real mystery is, why didn't this happen all the time? I mean, let's face it, public hygiene is just not a priority here. I mean, what with the raw sewage and the contaminated food and the bleeding and the leeches and the flagellation and the mortification and just the basic lack of self-esteem. So it is a fair question why it is that it took so long, why it took until the late Middle Ages for this one pathogen to achieve such a uniquely high R0 value. This is the ultimate variable that expresses the speed of the epidemic, so much faster than the usual suspects had managed for 1,000 years. Well, okay, there's a reason for this. For all its weaknesses, the European ecosystem had a firewall based in the domesticated predator, house cats and dogs whose job was to suppress the vector of the disease. They were in a symbiotic relationship. They had a roommate agreement where in return for food and shelter and a quiet place to sleep, they were tasked with wiping out the rodent enemy. And we see them in the manuscripts in these heroic action poses. Our symbiotic allies waging war against the common enemy. Up until the beginning of the 14th century. But when we do a statistical analysis of the cat and dog images in the medieval manuscripts, as one does, we see a rising proportion of them, starting in about 1300, as sick and depressed and psychotic. So there is something clearly happening in the first half of the 14th century to disable the firewall. And as we say in epidemiology, when the cat's away, the plague vector will play. But what was that? What's getting to these animals? Well, let's look at the checklist. Were they hungry? Nope. There's a lot of food on the trade routes in the early 14th century. The supply chain is basically intact. Were they cold? Nope. This is the medieval warm period. The climate is mild and stable. So, as scientists, we have to ask, was there some form of noise pollution that suddenly spread across Europe in the first half of the 14th century? And now that you mention it, yes, there was. Aha! The bagpipe. First recorded amongst Spanish Romani in 1285. Over the next 60 years, it spreads across Europe on the very trade routes that would later carry the plague-ridden grain. And this infests every aspect of medieval society, from the high noble villas to the peasant huts. This is Beatlemania. This is the 14th century version of rock and roll. And if we use the manuscripts as data points, we can actually plot both density and the probability of being within earshot. So if we understand the bagpipe as a factor in the R0 calculation, we can track it incubating like a virus on the vector. And the Scots understood this first when they used the bagpipe as biological warfare. A noise that would make their own troops willing to die, and the English to say, "Oh dear God, we give up, just make it stop." But no one in Europe seems to have noticed the biological catastrophe that we were inflicting on our domestic animals. Our symbiotic allies were being traumatized into inactivity. We were hitting them at both ends of their hearing range, disrupting their neural circuits. Oh, for the love of God, what this must have done to their rat-catching ability. As they begged, make it stop. But the Europeans of the 14th century had become the worst roommates ever, as they blasted their rock and roll at all hours, traumatizing their symbiotic allies. So when people started to come down with these mysterious flea bites, you think these animals are gonna lift a paw to help them? No, I don't think so. They're not out catching rats. They're huddled in the corner, terrorized, hoping that the torture will end. And as the plague rats start to overrun Europe, there is no one left to fight them. And as the value of the resistance drops to zero, R0 goes through the roof. And the Europeans of the 14th century paid a heavy price for their rock and roll, because now, in hindsight, it is so obvious that it was the bagpipes that caused the Black Death. And if my model holds, we explain so much in the historical record. The ancient Greeks, they kept dogs to kill their rats too. But then they had to go and invent this appalling double-barreled penny whistle and blast it at them indoors. What did they think was gonna happen here, right? When the plague came back to Europe in the 17th century, it emanated from northern Italy. Ever wonder why? When the Spanish flu killed 50 million people in 1918, it was caused by World War I, which was caused by German nationalism, which was caused by Wagner. So, in closing, if the heavy metal of the 1870s could incubate over 40 years into this, I shudder to think what the 1970s are about to do to us.
Michael Anderson, everybody. Okay, wait there. Yes, what have we unleashed yet again? Excellent, now don't go anywhere, because we're going to demonstrate the format of how this evening is going to work. So, as I mentioned before, we will be judging the various speakers who come up, and I'd like to bring, actually, you know what, we're going to bring up all the judges at once, and you give them a simultaneous round of applause. So please welcome to the stage, the judges! Do you have assigned seats, or it's just wherever you want to go? Nuts. Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to introduce the judges in a moment, and then I thought it might be fun if they have a practice go on Michael. All right, so Michael, if you would like to return to the focal point, I guess, of the stage, and we're going to go through the judges, and they can ask if you have a question or a comment. It's optional for Michael. Michael, you'll endeavor to respond. No pressure. Some pressure. Now, first up, we have Stephen Bush. And now, this is good. You write for the Financial Times, as well as Inside Politics, and you've written for the New York Times and The Guardian, and you were political editor for the New Statesman. I think it's good to have someone from the financial world, because for too long at BAHFest, contestants have played very fast and loose with the finances behind their various schemes. So I'm glad to have some more reasoned input. Do you have any questions for Michael's fantastic theory?
Yeah, so very compelling theory. I suppose I have one question, which is, there's a missing pandemic on your chart. What genre of music do you blame for HIV/AIDS? Not Eldar, I know.
Well, the epicenter of the pandemic was Wuhan, which is also the headquarters of the Chinese punk resistance. And I submit that when you have young Chinese people playing Sex Pistols covers and putting Ozzy Osbourne posters up on their wall, and then they go have bat soup for lunch, you do the math.
A good answer, although I think, strictly speaking, to a different question. You would do well here. You would do well here. Up next, Tracy King, writer, producer, and science communicator, and a long time involved in BAHFest over the years. And now Tracy's involved in training scientists at organizations, including the Royal Institution, Imperial College, has also written for The Guardian. Who hasn't? At this point. New Statesman, and their memoir, Learning to Think, will be published in March 2024. Wow, very exciting. You should bring a slide. We should put it up there. Have you got a question?
I mean, it's more of a statement than a question. Okay, so I have 3 cats. I listen to a lot of heavy metal. And during the pandemic, I didn't get COVID until I went to Birmingham, which is the birthplace of heavy metal music. So I guess my question is, coincidence?
Inoculation.
Efficient. Up next, Michele Dougherty, who's also been a judge here previously, involved in all sorts of spacecraft. Magnetic fields, in situ magnetic field measurement, that's your thing? There you go. My wife is a solar physicist, is also in situ magnetic field measurements. And so she's like, oh my God, you got Michele on the show. She's very excited. So there you are, that's. And there's some other stuff here, you've done blah, blah, blah. Have you got a question you would like to direct at Michael?
I'm not often speechless, but after hearing your talk, I'm speechless, so.
That is not true. And finally, Minna Lyons. Is that pronounced correctly?
Yes, correct.
Got it. Now, you've done a lot of work with cats. So you're a reader in forensic psychology. You're currently working at Liverpool John Moores University. And it says here you've been involved in studies investigating,
Psychopathy in cats. So I'm the expert here. I have some pressing questions for
This
you.
is great. We've never accidentally had a judge so qualified. I'm just going to step back.
So I'm a bit dubious about your historical epidemiological method. So have you ever considered doing experimental studies on modern cats to see how bagpipe music affects their rat-catching ability? Because I think we need to test modern cats as well to see actually if it influences their ability to catch rats when they are exposed to bagpipes.
No, because the historic role of cats has evolved since the 14th century. I don't think we rely on the cats to kill off the vector of the disease as much as we should probably be testing the effect of heavy metal on public health ministers.
In 2019, we had no idea public health ministers would get a burst of applause and rapturous laughter. I suppose the judges, great questions. Amazing. You're doing great. And you are now free to go. Final round of applause for Michael Anderson. All right. I will now read you the rules as written. Each speaker will have about 5 minutes to wow us with their amazing theory. After each speaker finishes, the judges can ask them anything they like, and they must do their best to answer. After all speakers have spoken, each of the judges will rate their top 3 talks. We will... Oh, they put me in the rules. Uh-oh. We will also take a decimeter poll of the audience to determine your favorite talk. We'll give it a go. Then we add them all up. Winner is the person with the most points. There you are. Very straightforward. I'm going to bring up all 6 people. I am not going to give away what they're talking about. It's up to them to reveal, in however they wish, what their theory is, what it entails. But I will give you, they've all... Did you write your own blurbs? They've all written their own blurb. So I will do my best. So up first, I'll say the name, I'll say the blurb, say the name again, applause, they come up. We'll make it some of you are very happy with the level of clarity and precision in how this show is advancing. Okay, so up first we're going to have Jack McMinn, who is a PhD student at the University of Oxford and the Natural History Museum. Wow, both. Do they know? Don't let the other one find out. He studies mammal biogeography, wow, and in his free time does comedy and plays the piano. Please put your hands together for Jack McMinn.
Thank you very much. So my talk will be on the applicability of avian super substances in architecture. Because it's a major problem, right? Whenever anyone builds a house, they have to take into account physical constraints, from the center of mass to tensile and compressive strength, to resonance, and presumably some others. But from what I've read from reliable sources, animals are always doing physics-defying feats, right? You know, they run quickly or are just rather large. And those are the only 2 options. One of my favorite examples of this is the common kestrel, which can use wind speeds of between 4 and 12 meters per second to essentially hover in the air to allow it to look for mice and rats in the grasslands below. And what would we be as the human species to not exploit this miracle of nature for capitalist gain? So I'm here to pitch to you a brand new super substance, Kestrel, a 2-dimensional a 2-dimensional crystal lattice made of hundreds and thousands of live kestrels. If we look up close, we can see the kestrels are bound together using their natural talons and, beak grappling abilities. So it's my absolute pleasure to present to you the home of the future. The housing crisis is over. Thanks to Kestrel, you can live your life suspended however high kestrels can fly. But let's talk about the science of this. And I know the number 1 question on all of your minds are, how many rodents would be needed to fuel this wondrous material? So for this, we put on our thinking caps, and we ask ourselves some obvious questions. A kestrel is about 71 centimeters across, which means they have an active area each of about 0.4 meters squared. They use about 15 watts of power in their natural flight, and the energy content of rodents digestible by kestrels is about 21 kilojoules per gram. If we combine all of these figures in this amazing diagram, we can see that a square meter of kestrel will require about 5 live mice every single day. So we can see that, it might take a bit of getting used to, but we all got used to air fryers, so... So the other question in your mind is, what about that prevailing wind that keeps the kestrels afloat? Well, obviously, this can be supplied by a large fan. But given that the Kestraline will be, meters, many hundreds of meters above the ground, you would have to stick the fan on another layer of Kestraline, and then that layer is suspended by a fan on the first layer of Kestraline, supplied by the natural rain of guano that Kestraline produces by all the mice you keep tipping on it. Now, this may be approaching perpetual motion territory. So anyway, what is the carrying capacity of Kestraline? Particularly once you remove the natural layer of mice that exists upon it. Well, there have been I'm going to say, disturbing number of experiments where people put weights on kestrels. And based on that, we can see that the further carrying capacity of a meter square of Kestraline minus the mice is about the equivalent of a nickel. Which isn't great when you're trying to raise your 2.5 children in the skies above London. So we have to think of additional weight support. Take, for example, this common all-garden fridge. This model of fridge weighs about 153 kilograms. Its floor space, it's about 0.8 meters squared. So if we take the Kestraline's carrying capacity into account, we can see that we need about 2.5 additional kk or kilo kestrels to carry the fridge, which can easily be administered from above. So in conclusion, the home of the future is one of convenience. And it just naturally leads the mind to wonder, what other birds can we exploit in this home of the future? Penguins are quite full of blubber, I'm told. Natural good insulation for the floor. A diving kestrel could be a good counterbalance for a lift. And finally, you can use a canary to detect the toxic methane fumes from all of the guano produced by the Kestraline. Anyway, the future is now, and the future is Kestraline. This is now a sales pitch. Thank you very much.
Jack McMinn, everybody! All right. I feel like if there was any uncertainty as to what kind of show this is, they've solved that problem. And maybe only that problem. Judges. At this point...
I actually have a question that goes back to the keynote speaker's talk as well. So kestrels do get parasites. So how do you take into consideration the potential infection of parasites in your kestrelines and the risks that they are posing to your 2.5 children families?
That's a great question. So I imagine the easiest way of cleaning your kestraline would be to get it to fly into a large body of water, dunk itself beneath, and then rise back up out of it. So I imagine that you would have to get one of the mice or a couple of the mice from, the natural floor layer, throw it overboard when you pass over a body of water, and then the kestraline will naturally descend into the body of water, at which point you can then pick the mice up, fire them into the air so that it rises out of the water, and I think that answers your question.
I'm pleased with that answer, thank you.
I have a question. I'm very concerned about the availability of affordable housing. Is this system adaptable to be used with pigeons?
Well, if you can find a way of getting a pigeon to hover, that would be useful. But also, I'm worried that then if you have a pigeon house system and then a Kestrel house system, it might cause problems.
So can I ask a very basic question? How do you persuade the Kestrels?
I don't think that, given our previous approach to how we've dealt with the natural world, we'd have to, we'd really taking, the Kestrel's permission to do this. I don't think that stopped us previously.
The United Kingdom and many other countries have legally binding targets to reduce their carbon emissions over a gradiated period. How do you envisage a bunch of birds who I assume, fart and, as you have yourself demonstrated very memorably, shit? How do you envisage that Kestreline is remotely compatible with the UK's commitment to net zero?
Well, I imagine, first of all, you're using the guano to fuel the giant fans. That's a natural part of the kind of symbiosis of this environment of a giant system of flying Kestrel houses. Secondly, we could just get rid of those net zero targets. Get rid of those first, and all the time, whenever they dial back environmental legislation, it's so they can then later slip in Kestreline laws. That's why they're there.
You all look very satisfied. A final round of applause for Jack McMinn. We will go racing into our next, contestant, scientist, our next presenter. Dan Shaw, as a civil engineer who's picked up degrees in international relations, leadership, and management. And there's a lot of ands in your degree. And maths and physics over the years. Currently studying part-time, give it a break. Postgraduate degrees in systems engineering and space science. He's been accused of being a polymath, but he maintains in order to be a polymath, you need to be halfway competent in at least some of the things. Now that I understand. Can you please put your hands together for Dan Shaw?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So, I've been doing some research and we found an unlikely feedback loop in maritime history. This talk mostly focuses on the history of the Royal Navy, so if you do happen to be French, I apologize in advance. So, Helen of Troy. The face launched 1,000 ships, well known throughout antiquity. We can calculate the SI unit of beauty required to launch a single ship, the millihelen. We also know that a Greek trimarine, because of modern-day replicas, come at a displacement of about 45 tons. So therefore, one Helen was capable of launching 45,000 tons of ship with her face. The American unit, for any Americans in the audience, the Imperial unit, Zach, is the Adonis. But what's the applicability to the modern age? I mean, one Helen would be considered to be the equivalent of a Handymax class bulk tanker full of pig iron. So that's about 45,000 tons displacement. And also, if we look at the global population today, if we look at how many people there were in the world during the time of Helen of Troy, it was about 55 million. So that's the equivalent of the most beautiful person in modern-day England being able to get a World War II battleship or a modern Kuznetsov-class aircraft carrier out of the slips and into the sea. There's clearly a lot more people than that in the world today, and there's a lot more warships. So what's the discrepancy? But we look at this and we suddenly realize that we can actually start to measure how global beauty standards impact warship numbers. And we do that by looking at the number of beautiful people in a society. So it's not just one person, it's all of the beautiful people. And it's actually directly linear. The relationship is linear. It's a remarkable finding. So if we take a case study, the Spanish Armada. Now, we all imagine that the Spanish Armada was this huge armada of Spanish ships being fought valiantly by this tiny, tiny English armada. But actually, most of the armada was transports and auxiliaries. The number of sort of ships of the line were actually surprisingly equal. There were 40 ships on each side. So 40 ships, ship of those days was about 300 tons. So that's about 260 millihelens worth of beauty from each nation. So if we look at some of the most beautiful people of the day, you have Sir Francis Drake, a renowned sailor, just fresh back from his circumnavigation, awful human being, right? I'm not going to sugarcoat that. Terrible, terrible person, but he is very good looking. You also have Queen Elizabeth I, who's 25 at the time, and this is really before the arsenic started to take effect. And like most 25-year-olds with her own personal executioner, she was regarded to be a beauty by everyone. So it gets us our 260 millihelens in order to understand how the English Navy is larger than you'd expect it to be, given the size of the United Kingdom. What about the opposition? Philip II of Spain. He was actually renowned to be quite a good-looking chap. He was head of, he was leader of the world's greatest empire. He was superpower of the time. But what are you wearing on your head, mate? It looks like a pepper pot. And that dramatically reduces his attractiveness. So we're able to work out the answer is fashion. You can make yourself look more beautiful by the clothes you wear and the approach you take into your life. And so if we look at, say, the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars, I mean, this looks dated and quaint to us, but this was the bleeding edge of fashion, right? So if you look at what the ladies were wearing, they have sort of loose, flowing dresses, sort of A around the middle, with actually surprisingly low-cut necklines, or especially when you consider what the Victorians were wearing later. And then if you look at this gentleman here, I mean, look at those trousers, right? They do not leave anything to the imagination. They are tight, just to show off a gentleman's legs. Well, what did you think I was going to say? We look at the opposition, we look at the French, and the French Navy was buoyed by Marie Antoinette's beauty. She was very well known throughout the world as a beautiful woman. However, when the inevitable happened, you'll note that her beauty has dropped significantly. And with the French Revolution, all of a sudden, the French fleet was thrown into disarray. Their shipbuilding program fell to bits. They had real problems sort of manning the fleet. And the French Navy, who up to this point had been able to hold its own against the Royal Navy, couldn't. They were decimated over the next 20 years. French attempts to find a replacement pin-up were lackluster. So, the Royal Navy in the Napoleonic ages, it's the maritime equivalent of the doom music kicking in. Right? This is like the world's most powerful navy, and they're utterly unstoppable. Who caused this? Why? Did you expect anybody else? So, Lord Byron, he's a teenager right as the Royal Navy is coming to a height of its powers in the Napoleonic Wars. And the really key point here is that the instant that all his scandals finally catch up with him and he flees to Greece, all of a sudden the Greek Navy in 1823 just exists. It just suddenly appears. I mean, the guy spends $4,000 of his own money, like outfitting the Greek fleet. And this is the man, he's a one-man romantic come shipbuilding program. This is a guy who was spinning out like reams of poetry, all for one end. This is the man who once swam the Bosphorus and back in one night just to get laid, right? And so he is just shifting ships. And it helps explain, because this generates a positive feedback loop, because confidence is sexy. How else can we explain how this man, who is, we have to admit, he's not the greatest looker, but he goes from his tremendous victory at the Nile to suddenly pulling one of the hottest actresses of the age. I mean, Nelson, he's not brilliant, but Emma Hamilton, all of a sudden she's being taken away from a stable marriage into a scandalously hot illicit pregnancy, a relationship, like, talk of the town. It's because confidence is sexy, and these guys had it in absolute spades. So even at the very end, at the Battle of Trafalgar, when Nelson, he's dying, and he hears that the Royal Navy has defeated the French by 25-0, you know, ships sunk, burnt, taken a prize, and he exhorts to Hardy, you know, kiss me, Hardy. And he's saying right at the last moment that we've got to keep the British end up of romanticism, making it bigger and bigger, stronger and stronger, harder and harder. The fleet, that is. Now, what if... what if your national attempts to build, you know, to have a pin-up just fail utterly? You will note that Austria now no longer has a coastline. And yes, the effect scales negatively. So a person with -1 Helen of beauty is someone who's ugly enough to sink a battleship. So we look at the Victorians. I mean, look at what they're wearing. And how are you supposed to like even put your arms around your beloved when you can't get close to them because of the big poofy skirts? These are people who are so sexually repressed that they find table legs to be attractive. And the Royal Navy at this point is the most powerful force in the world. But I mean, my man, I'm an engineer, and I mean, I'm straight, but yes. Gonna be honest. I mean, look at that hat. Man walks down the street wearing a hat like that. You know that he can engineer anything. And he's building the world's greatest iron ships. Because there's so much pent-up sexual frustration amongst the Victorians that it lights a fire under the Industrial Revolution, just so that Victorians can do something with their hands. So, what are the Americans doing in all this? Because at the turn of the century, the US Navy just is a non-entity. And then 8 years later, and they're sending the Great White Fleet of dreadnoughts around the world on a goodwill tour. This fleet has just suddenly appeared. And here we've come to the really important critical point. What caused it to leap into action? A small town near Los Angeles Naval Base by the name of Hollywood. The very first film made in Hollywood, 1908, The Count of Monte Cristo. And then all of a sudden we look at the Second World War, and you've got the US Navy. They're making a Liberty ship every single day, just because of Mae West. And if we look at the UK, the Royal Navy, everyone getting into uniform, everyone knows that a man looks good in uniform, any man or woman looks good in uniform, and then suddenly everything falls off when all the beautiful people in Britain go to Hollywood. So what then causes the Cold War? You'd think after the Second World War that everyone would have had enough, and that suety puddings and the advent of NHS dentists would absolutely drive down the national beauty standards, and we'd see fewer levels of ships. So what causes, all of a sudden, a massive spending on warships? The bikini top. So this is another thing we can blame on the French. If we look at the Cold War and the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was nearly caused by the mini dress, and very fortunately, I mean, honestly, JFK was the last man that we wanted to have his finger on the trigger at this point. And very fortunately, humanity is saved by the reduction in arms spending in the 1970s. But we've got to question, was it really worth it? Now, what caused the end of the Cold War? Was it the economic policies of East and West? I don't think so. Was it arms spending? Probably not. Was it big hair? The killer argument, beautiful people on an aircraft carrier. 1986, the wall comes tumbling down 3 years later. So the Royal Navy today is a force for good, but we must never forget the sacrifices made by the most beautiful people in society in order to ensure that Britannia rules the waves. Now, we shall now hear a series of shorter talks, thinly disguised as questions, from a group of people who wish that they themselves were at the podium.
Shorter talk is not a difficult bar to get under. So if you missed that, attractive people equal ships. Questions?
I have a question, yes. If your theory that there's a relationship between beautiful people and the strength of ships holds true, how do you explain the sinking of the Titanic despite the presence of Leonardo DiCaprio?
So the very interesting thing about that period was the advent of the telegraph. So at the time, people were, prior to this point, you see a lot of royalty being used as like the national pin-up, because those are only really the faces that you see. But all of a sudden, with the advent of telegraph, you're able to send pictures of national hotties around the world and agonizing 1 bit per second. Which means that all of a sudden the global sort of status quo of the world's most attractive people is in huge flux. You're suddenly realizing that there are lots of people suddenly being recognized as being attractive in the United States. We saw that in 1908 with the advent of Hollywood. You also have lots of beautiful people moving to the USA. Where's the Titanic going? To the USA. All of a sudden, beautiful people leaving the United Kingdom and going to America. Where was Titanic made? In the UK. All of a sudden, the national beauty levels of the UK are dropping, and something has to give.
Question from Stephen.
So, in the 1960s, the United Kingdom's naval power shrunk from being a superpower to that of a mid-sized country. Unfortunately for your thesis, the United Kingdom's peak of winning Miss World comes in the 1960s, from 1961, 1964, and 1965. While China and the United States, the foremost military superpowers in the world, between them have won 2 Miss Worlds in the last decade. In fact, the United Kingdom is the holder of Mr. World at the moment, so this is a bit
individuals in a country. So, yes, actually, the United Kingdom has had some good success, and you'll note that we are one of the larger navies in the world. No, we are not the same as the United States, which currently comes in at 100 Helens, which is staggering compared to the United Kingdom's 9.2 Helens. However, 9.2 Helens is still a lot. So, yeah, okay, the United States has not won as many Miss Worlds, but you walk down any street in California, and then suddenly there's beautiful people everywhere. So, yeah, it's a statistical outlier, but it's a signal within the noise as opposed to the nail in the coffin for the theory.
I think we're going to wrap it up, Michele.
So can I ask a quick question about the very ugly man in a big hat?
Yes, Philip II of Spain.
It was like halfway through,
Yeah.
and he was pretty ugly. And you then showed how everything increased afterwards because he was sexy, because he had steel behind him.
Sorry.
That.
Isn't our Kingdom Brunel?
Yeah, him.
Yeah, sorry,
Him.
I misunderstood you.
Yeah. I don't see how that fits in with your hypothesis.
So, sorry, the Victorians being so pent-up sexually frustrated that
Yes.
they have to just build large ships.
But how did that make them attractive?
I'm sorry, I'm an engineer. I don't quite understand the question.
In fact, we'll keep that going. A round of applause for Dan. Suzanne Shaw. Did you quickly calculate a correlation for your question?
Subscribe to the Financial Times. We go the extra mile.
That's amazing. I mean, Michelle sent stuff to Saturn, but that... Oh, wow. Good. Excellent. I'm glad I'm not a competitor. Okay. If you're wondering if we're sticking to time, we are, because in this show, time doesn't matter. Up next, we have Esther Redhouse White, who is a science communicator living in Newcastle. She has a degree in biochemistry, has previously worked in molecular biology laboratories, plural, a railway museum, and a haunted house. It doesn't say if they were simultaneous or the same building. She believes in learning by making mistakes, mostly because that implies she has learned a lot of things. Please put your hands together for Esther Redhouse White.
Good evening. One of the greatest challenges to modern medicine is antibiotic resistance, whereby pathogens evolve immunity to the medicines that we use to treat them. A potential way of overcoming this is to kill pathogens by using factors that they cannot evolve resistance to. Now, the list of these includes high-intensity sound waves, ultraviolet light, high pressure, and high temperatures. I'm here today to propose a novel infection treatment strategy combining dual use of ultraviolet light and high-intensity sound waves. Raves. The treatment methodology works like this. The patient enters the therapeutic rave area and is exposed to ultraviolet light and high-intensity ultrasound waves. Now, the ultrasound required for this is outside of the range of human hearing, but this does have the advantage of allowing us to play whatever music we like over the top. We're calling this treatment strategy post-infection antibiotic replacement rave therapy. And it has numerous advantages. It is a mass treatment measure, so it's very cost effective. It has none of the side effects of antibiotics, such as vomiting and diarrhea. Anecdotal evidence suggests that raves are enjoyable. The research team has requested additional time and funding to confirm this in full. And finally, during the last few years with the COVID pandemic, we have seen an emergence within the population of a certain subset of people who are resistant to medical information, such as refusing to socially distance even when easily able. An advantage of this technique is that it takes the treatment to where these people already are. Airless, sweaty rooms. Now, post-infection antibiotic replacement rave therapy does have its disadvantages. For example, it might be lethal for symbiotic microbes, such as the gut bacteria. However, a way of mitigating this is to hold a therapeutic rave within the wider context of an environment that encourages bacterial growth, such as a festival campsite. A second potential drawback is that using the wrong frequency of sound waves could conversely encourage the growth of pathogenic microbes, which is the opposite of what we want to do. And another drawback is that such high-intensity sound waves could kill everything in the room. Now, I realize that this does sound drastic, but please bear in mind it does at least completely eliminate the previous problem. However, we do understand the need to reduce harm to patients participating in this therapy, and so we are highly recommending the use of personal protective equipment for those participating in a therapy rave, such as, just skip some graphs of fatality. Such as ear defenders for the high-intensity sound waves, eye protection for the ultraviolet, and to avoid participants colliding in areas of low visible light, UV-activated face creams. Now, this treatment has already shown widespread success, and we're already looking at potential future expansions of it. We are going back to the factors that pathogens cannot evolve resistance to and incorporating additional ones, namely high pressure and high temperatures. It's possible to increase the temperature by asking participants to arrive wearing foil-based outerwear. And it's very easy to up the pressure by simply adding more people into the room. Another potential future collaboration with our research is by incorporating other existing medical therapies, such as the application of topical medications for skin conditions. However, the thing that I'm most proud of with this research is a broader application of it. As I mentioned earlier, during the last few years of the pandemic, we've seen the emergence of the people within the population who are resistant to medical information. Now, normally these people show low levels of acceptance of medication. However, after the commencement of a treatment rave, they will take basically any pill that's offered to them. Thus making this not only a novel infection treatment strategy, but also a potential strategy for increasing uptake of medical information within the population. Thank you very much.
Esther Redhouse White, everybody. And now we turn to the judges, who are completely convinced.
I mean, I've got no questions. That just took me back to my 20s, and I haven't really been much ill, so I think, you know, that kind of like backs up your treatment too.
Thank you.
I mean, further support of the thesis, in the 90s, of course, governments around the world legalized to prevent raves, and that coincided with the emergence of mad cow, so... Correlation is causation, right?
Yeah.
I love the faces of the judges working out how much they wish to reveal by how well informed their questions are. Michele?
So I was wondering if the author of the paper that you referenced knew that their work was being used in such a way.
We assume she's talking about Sandstorm? Just before you answer that, are they here? No.
This is unpublished research, so I'm sharing it with you under the assumption of confidentiality between everybody in this room and no doubt the several thousand people watching on the live stream. But I'm sure once this is published, they will find out about it.
And if I wanted to get on a clinical trial for this, how do I fight for my right to party?
We're a very accepting lab, as we say, post-infection antibiotic replacement rave therapy to the people.
A big round of applause! That's all I have. We're precisely halfway through our scientists presenting tonight, which is why it's a good time to remind you, Zach wrote a book. There you go. Up next, Kat Arney. If anyone came to the book panel, which a few of us did, Kat was there because she's an award-winning science writer, broadcaster, and public speaker, author of several popular science books, including Herding Hemingway's Cats Not Relevant to the Introduction. That was in my local library in Australia. I found it there. It's like a 3-book science section, and that was one of them. Anyway, so 30% of the Perth Science Library collection. Also, is the founder of a communications company trying to generate good science communication. Can you please put your hands together for Cat Arney?
Thank you very much. I bet the other two were bloody Dawkins and Rutherford, weren't they? Twats. Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Cat Arney. I would like to present my bad ad hoc hypothesis towards a polygenic risk scores approach for solving the lifeboat problem. Now, as you may be familiar, the lifeboat problem is a classic ethical dilemma based on the fact that most lifeboats in a disaster situation are overloaded, let's assume by n plus 25%, leaving us with the challenge of deciding who gets to stay on the boat and who must be consigned to the briny deep. So, for example, if we have a lifeboat with a capacity of 8, but it is laden n plus 2, that's passengers, 10 passengers, this gives us 25% more passengers. 2 of these passengers must be sacrificed, giving us an 80 to 20 ratio of survivors to sacrifices. Now, this presents us with a significant ethical challenge of deciding who gets to stay and who gets to go. How should we judge? Should we judge people on their gender, their age, their intelligence, their health, their value to society, their political affiliation? It is very problematic, and someone's going to be filming this shit and putting it on TikTok. This is like fast track to cancellation, extraordinarily problematic. So I wondered if there was a better way, a fairer way, a more scientific way of solving the lifeboat problem. And I am a geneticist, so genetics is the way I want to go. And I came across this solution while I was researching my last book, available in all bookshops and afterwards. And the solution lies here. This is not a very exciting sex toy. This is the unicellular slime mold Dictyostelium discoides, or Dicty to its friends. Now, they have a very interesting life cycle. They usually exist as unicellular cells swimming around in the soil and doing their stuff. But when disaster strikes, something interesting happens. They come together, they form a little slug, and then they form a structure that looks, indeed, very much like a butt plug. And what happens, we have the formation of the stalk and the formation of the spores, and then the spores kind of burst out into the wider world in search of safety. And when I started looking into this, I realized that 80% of the cells are in the spores and launch themselves to safety, and 20% are prepared to make the sacrificial stalk. This is our lifeboat ratio, folks. I mean, come on. I mean, it's amazing coincidence, because this is the solution. Because it's even more interesting when you look at it, because it turns out that whether you end up in the stalk, sacrificing yourself, or in the spore, saving yourself, is determined by the genetics of the amoeba, right? This is incredible. And it got me thinking. So the plan goes like this. First, we find the human homologs of the Dictyostelium gene that's responsible for deciding if you end up in the stalk or the spore. Then we genotype the population, and then we make sure that we load lifeboats in a disaster situation in the 80 to 20 ratio of those with the genetics appropriate to spore and those appropriate to stalk, thus guaranteeing that we always have that crucial 20% of people prepared to sacrifice themselves for the greater good. Okay? Oh, it's fine. But, and I know you're thinking this, you're thinking, but Kat, there's a problem. And I'm like, damn right there's a problem. When I actually looked into this, it turns out there's more than 100 genes that are involved. So my plan just to do a very simple single gene genotyping is not going to work. We have to use something called a polygenic risk score. Now it works like this. What you do is you take an individual, you look at all their genes together, and it gives you a kind of genetic fingerprint, and we can then assign people on a spectrum that I've called the antisociality sliding scale that goes from minus 100, being one of those true altruists that's prepared to give up themselves for the greater good, all the way to being a complete effing arsehole. So, based on this, what we do is that when we are genotyping people to go on cruises, we make sure that in the disaster situation, we're weighting the population appropriately in the lifeboats across this spectrum so that we'll always have this crucial 20% of people prepared to give up themselves for the greater good. Amazing, no problem, right? No decisions, no TikToks, no cancellation. It's absolutely fine. But then I realized something. There's this fucking guy. So actually, I've revised my hypothesis. I think we should throw him overboard, and then we only have to lose one nice person. Perfect. So I stepped back and I thought about this and my plan to genetically test humans and decide who should live or die. And in search of a better solution and to not be cancelled forever, I returned to the 2008 paper looking at the genetics of stork and spore. And I noticed this phrase, crucial phrase. So while there are mutations in over 100 genes, this phrase, cooperating normally when clonal, is the secret. Because this means that if all the cells coming together are genetically identical, then there is an equal likelihood of ending up in stalk and spore. So I revised my hypothesis, and we just segregate all activities by genotype. So, you test, you have one group going on this cruise, you have another group going on this cruise, and this means that in a disaster situation, all people on the lifeboat are genetically very similar. You can then just draw lots, and it doesn't matter, and it's very fair. So this is a problem when you start segregating people into different activities according to their genetic traits. So again, I returned to dictyostelium in search of an answer. And I can reveal that the solution to the lifeboat problem does indeed lie in the life cycle of dictyostelium. I propose that we should fit cruise ships with long-range cannons that can eject all participants into the world to save themselves, thus doing away with the need for lifeboats and doing away with the lifeboat problem. Now, you might ask, well, how are you going to do this? You all look like engineers, so you can all figure it out, thank you. Please read my books and listen to my stuff.
Arney? Arney there with the being problematic version of speedrunning. Okay, questions?
So if genetic superiority should be considered a factor in who lives or dies in a lifeboat scenario, how do you explain that there wasn't enough room on that raft for Leonardo DiCaprio?
I'm not arguing for genetic superiority. I'm arguing that we should just select people who naturally want to give themselves up. So when it's not about superiority, it's about being nice.
I'm going to survive.
I know you, Tracy.
So the cruise industry is largely reliant on the custom of high-earning, relatively older customers, and you are actually much more likely to be in the company of a CEO on a cruise ship than you are on land. You're also more likely to be in the company of a sociopath when you're in the company of a CEO, other than the ones who read the Financial Times. Isn't there a slight problem that you're not going to have enough people who want to cooperate for the otherwise wholly desirable and not at all worrying plan to segregate people by gene?
Well, this is the beauty of the polygenic risk score, because it just puts people on a spectrum. So wherever you take the proportion of people on that spectrum, you guarantee that you're moving in any part you start from being less of an arsehole to being more of an arsehole. So I do agree that the populations loading onto cruise ships are going to be weighted more towards the arsehole end. But if we assume that this is like generally a normal distribution, which we always find outside, everywhere, that we will still have two people who are nice, or rather we have at least two people who are nice, but we'll also have that fucking guy, and then he goes, and then one of the nice people will decide to go, and then like everyone's a winner, apart from those two.
If you couldn't see it, she's miming that fucking guy and the nice person.
So I just want to make a comment. You've convinced me never to go on a cruise ship. Thank you, Kat.
You seem really nice.
That's why.
Yeah.
I'm scared I'd be one of those people.
No, don't. It'll be awful
Yeah.
for you. Don't do it.
There you go. Big round of applause for Arney. Honestly, I'm right next to Zach, and when that slide came up, he's like, oh, what a sellout, honestly. So, up next, we have Jack Powell, who, since the abrupt and tragic postponement of BAHFest 2020, when they were a mere third-year Imperial undergraduate, they have now strayed from their scientific roots. Oh, they're ancestored into the spot. That's well done. They completed their MSci in chemistry. They've now pivoted into cybersecurity masters and working on emerging technology policy in the civil service. Can you please put your hands together for Jack Powell?
Well, good evening. Thank you very much for having me here. This evening, I have the immeasurable pleasure of talking to you about a rather exciting proposal that I have for the planet. We're going to be talking... I don't need to say any more on that, do I? So I want to start tonight by talking to you about three problems which I know are very close to all of our hearts. Firstly, skiing. In this country, it's not really up to scratch, is it? We'll never host the Winter Olympics. Our resorts are never going to rival those of Europe or the US. Secondly, climate change is bad. Thirdly, the economy is also not doing so well, and to such an extent that I don't even need to label these axes, and you know it's bad news. Now, wouldn't it be great if somebody were to present you with a way to kill all three of those proverbial birds with one stone? See, most planets in the solar system, Earth included, exhibit what's called prograde rotation. So they spin in the same way that they orbit the sun. The alternative to this is retrograde rotation. Currently, it's only Venus and Uranus in this category. But frankly, what a conformist attitude. I mean, Earth's spin is responsible for a catalogue of phenomena, from ocean currents to the Coriolis effect to the trade winds. It's a hugely influential factor on our environment, but it's not something we got to decide. We never got to kind of debate on this. We never even got to vote. But surely this is all immaterial anyway. It's not like we can just kind of go back to pre-climate change days and check if retrograde would have been better. Or is it? Because actually, if we run a simulation with those parameters, what we get is this. Changes in rainfall and wind patterns redistribute the terrestrial vegetation across the planet, but crucially, there's about 11 million square kilometers less of desert landscape. About half of this becomes grassland, the other half becomes rainforest, and hopefully you can see where I'm going with this. And I present to you Earth, the potentially improved version, which doesn't even show up that well on the screen, which is really sad. Because it's so green, that's the thing. It looks incredibly green, doesn't it? You could be jetting off to such attractions as the Great Dubai Rainforest, the Florida/most of America desert, and even the verdant and extremely habitable Australian outback. There you go, Matt, there's one for you as well. So read that whole climate change thing. All the new vegetation acts like a nice big carbon sink, rolling back the effects of decades of emissions. And it's actually not just climate change. We also get an absolute ton of newly arable land, which solves the global food crisis. More importantly, a rejuvenated UK ski industry into something that will rival that of Europe. So cold air piped in fresh from Siberia. Think 2018's Beast from the East, but bigger and every winter. We conveniently also decimate the average snowfall in the competitor US resorts, so trust me, you're going to want to buy stock in UK ski companies. But it would be remiss of me to present you with this glorious utopia without talking about how we're going to get there. So let's talk about some methods. Method one is to put some gigantic, extremely large magnets in orbit around the Earth, which interact with the core to wrestle it the other way, pulling on the crust and then the atmosphere, giving us our reversed Earth. As a dual use, the magnets could even be put on cleanup duty, ridding us of all the disused satellites that litter low Earth orbit. The new magnetic field would also produce 24/7 auroras, so if you've always wanted to see the northern lights, this is by far your most sensible way of doing so. So it does come with some caveats, the main one being that the state would need to requisition everything metallic that you own, especially those with magnetic properties, in order to build them. This would actually be for your safety from induced electric currents and flying chunks of magnetic metal. And you could even sleep soundly at night knowing that all your little fridge magnets, copper wiring, and iron railings were hard at work up in space in the upper atmosphere doing good for the planet. Option two, and physicists absolutely love talking about angular momentum, and to use a very overused analogy, like a ballet dancer extending their limbs during a spin, we will extend the space elevator into the heavens in order to slow the rotation, followed by a bit of a kick in the opposite direction. So for this to have the desired effect, the mass on the end of the tether would itself need to be comparable to the mass of the Earth, which leaves us with the entirely insignificant risk of destabilizing the orbit of the moon. Frankly, given the enormous benefits I've outlined previously, this is absolutely worth taking. And your third option is probably the one you were thinking of to start with when I said reverse the Earth's spin. So a glancing impact by an asteroid / suitably large thing at the equator, shown there in this artist's impression and off to the left here in this Microsoft PowerPoint user's impression as well. A mass of about a quarter of the moon would need to collide at a mere 51 kilometers a second, which is very achievable. The debris from the impacts could actually form into some kind of ring system, you know, something like Saturn has, which I think would brighten up an otherwise really quite dull night sky. So, in conclusion, let's reverse the Earth's spin to combat climate change, bring back the Great British Winter, and at the very least, get one over on the Americans. Sorry, Zach. Thank you very much for listening. I will now open up some questions.
Jack Powell. Do we want to go to Michele first or last? Last. Any other questions?
Well, I'm just thinking of the Northern Lights aspect because I'm from Finland originally and I have never, ever, ever seen Northern Lights in my life, despite trying multiple times in Lapland, Iceland, here and there.
That is a tragedy.
And I think that, like, could you guarantee for me that if this happened, that I could actually finally see Northern Lights?
Yes, Minna, exactly. Personally, for you, I can guarantee right here, right now, if we enact this plan, it will not matter where on Earth you are, you will see the Northern Lights, but contingent, obviously, on picking the giant magnets approach, which, to be honest, is kind of my favourite anyway. So, yeah.
Thank you.
In the early 1980s, there was a documentary film by a scientist called Clark Kent. And I seem to recall some sort of science towards the end of that, in which he flew backwards around the Earth, thereby reversing time. Is there any risk with this that you could mess with time, thereby perhaps taking us back to a point before climate change was a problem?
So, Tracy, fantastic. Thank you for bringing that up. This was actually one of the alternative methods that I thought about. And I was doing some thinking. Of course, she's talking about the 1979 Superman film in which, to save Lois Lane, Superman flies very, very fast kind of around the Earth in order to reverse time and go back and save her. So I did think about using that, and then I kind of got to thinking a bit more, and I wondered whether Superman had actually achieved this reversed Earth / reverse time when he did that. Whether, as a consequence, we might now be living in a situation where it could have been a lot worse, climate change-wise, but Superman's actually kind of saved us from that. And that is really worrying, because then where do we go with the rest of the plan to stop climate change? It's completely hopeless.
So Thanos, then, that's the plan B.
It's not every day you see the birth of a new form of climate change denial. Michelle?
So, I was
Oh, here we go.
I was wondering if you'd thought of combining option 2 and option 3, because then you wouldn't have to wait for an asteroid, because the moon would get knocked off its orbit and the moon could do it for you.
You know, Michelle, that's fantastic thinking. That's exactly the kind of cost-effective, money-saving thinking that we like, and I'd like to offer you a job in government.
Wow. Well, that explains a lot of things. A final big round of applause for Jack Powell. And now for our final presenter this evening. Ed Bilson is a chartered engineer whose previous experience in material science, public transportation and satellite technology leave him uniquely placed already on the stage to bore people at parties. You wrote this! He's worked internationally on derailments, not his fault, watching paint dry, not his fault, and digging trains out of snowdrifts. Weirdly, that was down to him. Can you please put your hands together for Ed Bilson?
Thank you very much. Friends, enemies, frenemies, good evening. Steel, an engineering material so prevalent, so useful, that if it didn't exist, we would be obliged to invent it. For 3,000 years, this material has held humanity in its iron grip. Attempts to replace it, aluminium, titanium, the ubiquitous plastic, have all failed. Until now. This research has discovered a material which is carbon neutral, lightweight, and processable at room temperature. A material which on paper and in the lab outperforms steel in every test we threw at it. I'm talking, of course, about the dried up bits of cereal stuck to your breakfast crockery. Now, every day across the country, people finish their healthy breakfast of high-fiber cereal and leave the remains in the sink, only to discover that the bowl is now coated with a hard, immovable shell of grain derivative. Inedible and, more importantly, indelible, this widely available and previously ignored waste material could be the 21st century replacement for steel that we've obviously all been waiting for. Now, we did initially wonder whether this was just a daft idea. So we did what all engineers do with daft ideas and decided to conduct a set of practical experiments. Samples of steel, aluminium, wood fiber composite, and cereal-based steel alternative were immersed in a lactose solution for 5 minutes prior to a physical examination. Now, you will already have spotted that some of these are not suitable for industrial applications. But really, what we were looking for was the ability to shape the material without those high temperature processes required for steel. You can see here both the steel and the cardboard, predictably disappointing. We did get much better results from the aluminium. The civil engineers in the room will recognize this is in fact an I-beam cross-section. It's a very important element in structural engineering, and tantalizingly, this suggests that there's unexplored potential for milk-based processes in traditional manufacturing sectors. But it's the results of the cereal-based alternative which really speak for themselves. Not just one, but 4 standard structural engineering cross-sections, all formed at room temperature. Now, of course, these results are primitive, but then so were the first carbon nanotubes. And while, like nanotubes, we've yet to replicate the results at scale, we do consider them a strong indication that cereal-based steel alternatives can hold their own against traditional engineering materials. And the benefits really do stack up when you start to look at the comparative economies of scale. This here is the former Redcast Steelworks. It's a reasonably interesting place, but like all steel production facilities, it's not a pleasant place to spend time in. There's noise, heat, pollution, and so on. You know, it's not the kind of place you'd want to have a picnic. I put it to you, however, that everyone's happy to have a picnic in a wheat field. Then there's steel's carbon footprint. It's enormous, and the best industry answer we have for this is carbon capture and sequestration, as seen here, rather than, for example, growing a large field of wheat. But I'll let you in on a secret. In terms of reducing atmospheric carbon at scale, only one of those 2 things actually works. And it's not carbon capture. There are additional social benefits to the change. You know, we're no longer avoiding the washing up. No, we are dragging manufacturing, kicking and screaming into the 21st century. In fact, in our analysis, the only area we found where steel matched the performance of dried up bits of cereal was their mutually low sodium content. And even then, engineering standards clearly permit trace elements of non-alloy elements in steel, whereas every box of cereal will tell you it contains 0 sodium. There's clearly no comparison. It's not whether this material will be implemented, but when and how. Construction, for example, a key market for steel where we value it for its compatibility with concrete. Now, we don't have any data for the compatibility of concrete and cereals yet. But we have identified that industry can avoid this issue altogether by replacing the concrete with porridge. Now, this does open the door to a whole host of options, and we've been concentrating our efforts on 3 products. The first is a substitute for cavity insulation we're calling shredded heat. The second is an aggregate replacement based on oats, gravel-ola. And of course, our flagship masonry alternative, Weetabix. Other cereals are available. But, you know, to summarize for the doubters among us, am I truly suggesting that we replace steel, the linchpin of 3 millennia of societal progress, with bits of leftover breakfast? Yes, obviously I am. Agriculture is 10,000 years older than the discovery of iron. Steel is itself a nasty little fad which history will show has only slowed our progress as a species. The world is ready for this. I think we are at most 10 years away from a reality where trucks full of porridge build the next skyscrapers, where marine engineers design rice cake boat hulls, where humanity takes to the skies with whole grain cereal composite aircraft. This is the low cholesterol engineering material we've been crying out for. And with it, like a blade of wheat, we shall rise together towards a brighter and crunchier future. Thank you. I will now stand here terrified while I am interrogated by a panel of talented people.
Talented people.
So, listening to this very diverting talk, I realized what it must have been like to listen to Oppenheimer speak.
It's nice to have my genius
undoubtedly, undoubtedly the science has absolutely no holes in it. Undoubtedly, this is a provision that could change the world, but equally undoubtedly, this is a plan, surely, to reorient the balance of world power away from the capitalist West. Number 1, don't look this up. Number 2, actually, but number 2 producer of steel, the United States. Number 1 producer of cereal, China.
I mean, Stephen, I really couldn't have put it any better myself. When the revolution comes, but this is neither the time nor the place. you for your question.
Subscribe to the Financial Times. Okay.
I will never look at cereal the same way again.
It seems the workers are unified. A final round of applause for Ed Bilson. All right. Okay, now we need to get down to business of determining who's going to win. And I wish to point out the overall winner will get a 3D printed statue of alchemist Hennig Brand boiling his own urine. Zach, do we have the statue? Oh, it's here. There. Right. So a little bit of background information. Why was he boiling his own urine, you say? Well, it was the first step in a series of steps he thought were necessary for turning urine into gold. It says here he was wrong, although did accidentally discover the chemical element phosphorus, and thus will be remembered forever, both in history and in 3D printed form. So that will be the grand prize for whoever wins. The judges are ranking their favorite top three. While that's happening, we, the people, need to decide who our favorite is. And we're going to do that by the overly complicated noise meter thing. And to make this work, so just a quick reminder, we're going to do them in a random order? Wait, no, hang on. Should I randomly shuffle them, or should I randomly pick one until we've had enough repeats that we have covered everyone in the set? Are you finished? We haven't started. Oh, okay. We're going to do them in the order that they happened. So then that's something to balance out the recency bias. And by the way, yes, if you're at the front, you've got a weighted vote by the inverse square. Okay. Just realized a problem that I can fix fairly easily. Okay. You don't get to vote. You're not like friends of these people. None of you's hired a bunch of actors. Okay, so, reminder. You saw, this is the reminder, not the vote. You saw Jack McMinn talking about kestrels as a novel building material. You saw Dan Shaw talking about human attractiveness, explaining the development of navies. You saw Esther Redhouse White using raves to mechanically destroy diseases. You saw Kat Arney solving the lifeboat problem by modeling humans on a thing I'm not going to try and pronounce. You saw Jack, dictostelids. Those ones. Yep. You saw Jack Powell reversing the Earth's rotation to solve climate change, and you saw Ed Bilson using leftover cereal as a replacement for steel in construction. I will say the concept, I can't take questions.
Bias us towards the last one.
Oh, that's right. Could we get Zach's book slide back up?
And Matt?
Excellent point.
Are we allowed to clap, or does that double?
No, you've already had, yeah. You can emote and try and influence by how happy or sad you... Yes, absolutely. Okay. I'm going to say the topic, not the person, because that's... Okay, are you ready? And don't forget, I'm going to give you the thumbs up before. Kestrels as a novel building material.
Is it maximum or an average?
They've gone for maximum.
Maximum.
We had a whole.
Over the average?
We had a whole vote.
So you're talking about
Okay.
a squared.
Do you look at what I'm doing and thinking, Matt, that's not complicated enough? Okay, here we are. Up next, human attractiveness versus navies. We're really seeing the power of a log scale on this thing now.
It's breathtaking.
Okay. Using raves to mechanically destroy diseases. solving the lifeboat problem by using that biology thing. You have to zero it before we start. This is my favorite part of the show.
I'm having a great time.
Me too. Reversing the Earth's rotation to solve climate change. It's 3 presses to reset, which is ridiculous.
Pay for the full version.
I'm not paying for the full version. You pay me for this, I'll pay for the full version. So, leftover cereal as a replacement for steel in construction.
Do we do the Lloyd James Award for best chart? Yeah.
We know. Now, there is another prize we hand out. It is the Lloyd James Award for best use of a chart. There's a special medallion, which is going to be awarded. So Lloyd James is one of the organizers who gives out this special award for the best use, in their opinion and their opinion only, of all the presentations. Put your hands together for Lloyd James.
I'm delighted to present the Lloyd James Prize for Best Use of Graphs, Charts and/or Figures to Jack Powell for a thought-provoking illustration of the Earth with a retrograde orbit, or rotation.
It's an absolute honor. Thank you very much.
I'll do thank yous first. Yeah. Let's drag it out. By the way, that is obviously decided parallel, so there's no impact in the further awards. We're going to do thank yous first, because obviously once you know who wins, well, at least you'll all leave. Something like this, putting it together, is absolutely a phenomenal enterprise to get this many things together. And so we're hugely grateful, of course, to the judges, who I will name and then you applaud. Minna, Lyons, thank you very much for coming along. That's a man. Michele Dougherty. Tracy King. Stephen Bush. Subscribe to the Financial Times. Very nice. And your first person up, who gave us the keynote presentation, who hopefully is wrong this time. Put your hands together for Michael Anderson. And then we have some other people. Lloyd James, you just saw giving the award, is running around organizing all sorts of things and is the main contact here at Imperial. Zach Weinersmith, who had to convince his publisher to fly him over here, saying he would show the slide at least 17 times. This just literally says Kelly Weinersmith also did some organizing. He's watching on the live stream. I don't know. Someone else on your coattails, Zach. It says here, the real scientist in the relationship. That's interesting. With volunteers, so you see people in these bright yellow shirts who've been racing around. We couldn't do it without the army of and me. And now, I should say, if you want to hang around and say hello, some of us, those of us who, no one's brought it up yet, but a few of us have books to sell. Zach will be around signing books. Kat will be around signing books. Boule will be, are you signing your own books or ones you've done with Zach? Both. And mine, excellent. And my books, we will be in the senior common room, I think, which is directly across on this level if you want to come and say hi. I will say, at least for my queue, you don't have to buy a book. If you just want to come and say hi, that's absolutely fine, but there are books available to purchase if you want to come and see us there. I think that's it. Do you want to come and give them the award, Zach? That feels like a theatrical way to do this. Now, I can say we did have a tie coming out of the official judging that was then split by the audience vote. So this at last, it's about time. Democracy has come to the rescue. And so I'm just going to say the name of the winner. They're going to come up. You give them a huge round of applause. We'll give them the one. They told us all about using raves to mechanically destroy diseases. Put your hands together for Esther Redhouse White! Do you want to say some words?
I have nothing to say other than thank you so much, and I'm now accepting applications to join the research team. Thank you.
And on that note, this is done. This is always a huge amount of fun to come on and do. Thank you so much to everyone who came to see this. If it wasn't people showing up to these sorts of events, we wouldn't have the thriving scene of science communication here in the UK. And phenomenal events like this do seek out other smaller, bigger, ridiculous comedy, science, nerdy events. Support things that you think there should be more of. Huge thanks you to all the contestants who I didn't thank a second ago, because without you putting all the effort into those phenomenal talks, and we all enjoyed them immensely, this wouldn't happen. So a final round of applause for all the speakers. The judges, we're out of here. Bye-bye. And it's great, so good.
Seriously, this is the worst day.